First year, I always tell people, in the first year I made what I could make in an afternoon trading on the trading floor in a whole year of work. It was very depressing.
Yeah.
But looking back now, Hersh, it was such a great thing because reinvention made me grow in so many different ways that I always joke if I just put a couple of $100 in Bitcoin when it was at 5 cents and I became a Bitcoin multimillionaire, I promise you I wouldn't be with my wife and I wouldn't be so happy now. I'd probably be, traveling, chasing young models and trying to be a playboy. And I guarantee you I'd be much less fulfilled and happy than I am now in the situation I have. So many times it's such a good lesson. I always love talking about it because so many times with people, when you're going through the darkest moments, the worst breakups, the worst career things, whatever it is, when you're in the moment, life seems so bleak. And sometimes it's really hard to even imagine a better future. But the crazy thing about humanity is that you can look back at that exact same thing 10 years later and realize it was the best thing that happened to you. But it's so hard to see it in the time.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes.
Today's guest on Truth Tastes Funny has spent the majority of his adult life reading, learning, practicing the diverse fields of martial arts, also finance, real estate, excellence, and ultimately happiness. So Lawrence Dunning is going to talk to us about all of this stuff, which kind of all revolves around reinvention and discovery in one way or another, with healthy doses of life and business. So Lawrence, welcome to Truth Tastes Funny.
Thank you, Hersh. What a pleasure to be here. And I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a really great conversation.
Thank you. So do I. We've talked about your martial arts background off the air a little bit. I'm always happy to have a jujitsu, black belt in my presence. Now we're only on Zoom, so there's not much that you can do in the way of protecting me, from unwanted forces out there. But at the same time, I wanted to start with some of the psychological aspects of life and business. I've been having a lot of, I have been having a lot of dreams lately about life and business merging in ways that I never really used to dream about them. I was at a work event, I would dream about a work event. If I was dreaming about life, it was, now it's all getting jumbled together. So I'm interested in your take on life and business from a psychological kind of point of view.
Well, firstly, I think it's really awesome that you're dreaming a lot because I think I went through a phase where I don't drink alcohol, but I do indulge in some marijuana edibles. And I think I was having them regularly and I just stopped dreaming. And I took a few months completely cold turkey. I was like, I don't think that's good. I think you should be dreaming. So kudos to you. I feel like your subconscious is working really hard. So I think that's awesome. But Hersh, the idea of so many people say work-life balance. And if you think about it, look at a surfer. You're literally just balanced for, maybe 30 seconds if it's a good ride. And then you don't stay in balance. Balance is just a point in time, typically. And so I don't really like that phrase. I like integration. And I think what you said is perfect. There's so much crossover with me and work and life. And I love working. I love it when people I work with in real estate become friends. I love doing entrepreneurial ventures with friends. So bringing friends into business. So I really do believe in a lot of crossover. And I don't think it has to be conflict. I remember having a friend say, oh, I don't know. I do a lot of development projects and I have outside investors come in and, more capital, you can do bigger projects. And I look at it as a win-win. Like I want to help my friends make money. I want to make money. I want to do cool things together. And I remember a friend saying, one of our mutual friends and one of the investors saying, I don't think it's good to mix business and friendship. And I disagree. I want it every time my phone either rings or I see a number come from a text. I want it to be someone that I want to be around them. I'm looking forward to talking to them. It makes me, I smile when I see their name, as opposed to, what it's like when you have to talk to people and you're just like, oh, you're dreading, you see their name pop up and you have that feeling of dread. So I remember Hersh hearing this wonderful thing by It was Nabil Ravikant, a very successful entrepreneur. And I think he was an early crypto investor, super, super wealthy. And he said, when someone brings me a business venture, the first thing I think about is not, will it make money? It's, do I want to have dinner with maybe this guy and his wife and me and my wife? Do I want to be around them? Do I want to see his name pop up late at night on a Thursday when I'm tired and we have to troubleshoot some problem for 30 minutes when really I just want to sit on the sofa and watch Netflix? And if the answer is yes, then I'll start thinking, as long as it's not a stupid idea, if there's even a chance of making money, I'll be way more interested than a business venture that I know is almost guaranteed to be profitable, but it's not with the people that I want to spend. And I think that comes around to the fact that, you know, money's great, but ultimately time is our only non-renewable resource. And I think the older I get, the more I appreciate. I'm 45, and I feel like I'm 85. So I'm so conscious of the fact that, you know, time it seems like it speeds up. You know, I have a 3.5-year-old son, and I'm like, where did the last 3.5 years go? You know, when you're busy with lots of things going on, I'm always trying to push myself to be busy. Time seems to speed up. So I think just that idea of time being the most essential thing, I think, is so important.
Yeah. And listening to you speak, I was thinking back to, I don't remember where it was that I heard it, but it was very early on in my professional life, or maybe even in my formative years, a businessman saying, I don't do business with friends. I don't do business with the friends. And at first I thought, oh, you know, maybe it's smart, because the implication was, you know, if something goes bad, the friendship's, you know, ruined, and why mix it? And then I realized, as I, you know, first of all, you know, my dad was an attorney in private practice. It seemed as though his clients by and large were friends, and vice versa, you know, and there was definitely, like, you know, there definitely was this familial aspect to things. And then there were people that he had really good relationships with who were clients, and just didn't see that they weren't social friends, you know. But what it started me thinking about was that when, you know, depending on how we look at work, we might say, oh, I don't want to, you know, mix the two, because my friends are my escape from work. If I bring my friends into my work life, then I'm ruining them for myself. In other words, you know what I mean? I don't want to sit here with them and use my time with them to draw up their contracts. I want to spend time with my friends doing my friend things, my leisure things. And that I can see, but I also think that's a reason to maybe reflect on, how much do you love what you're doing? Because if you can't somehow blend it together, if one threatens the other, that's probably not a good, you know, if your personal relationships are threatening your fulfillment at your chosen profession, or vice versa, then something's maybe off.
Well, when you were talking, you just brought back a memory. It was a friend that had this, it was a tech startup idea. I think it was around 2010. I had some money at the time, but not too much. And I gave him a big check. And I thought, it's either going to give me like a 10 times return, or I'm probably going to lose it. You know, it was kind of he was getting the second round funding for this. It was a great idea. And I ended up losing everything. And we're still great friends to this day. I didn't blame him at all, because he did everything with complete transparency. And he was very upfront. And he said, Lawrence, you know, we didn't get the second round of financing. I'm so sorry. You know, I was an initial investor. And so I think people, it probably is not the best friendship if it doesn't work out as planned and they get upset with you, as long as you're transparent with everything. Like, obviously, if you're lying or you're not telling the whole picture, then you're a terrible friend, right? So I think that's if it's a strong friendship or a solid business partnership, I don't think that's going to be an issue. But I can see why there's fear there. But I think, I think the older I get, the more I realize, with, like, I use jiu-jitsu as an example. I've got friends that I almost never see outside jiu-jitsu, because they have families that live in a different area of the city than me. We're all so busy. But even just, you know, 5-10 minutes after practice, you're chatting on the mats. I consider them a good friend, but I see them in a very limited capacity. And so I think the idea of, I really like what you said, because you're saying, when I see my friends, I don't want to be talking about business with them. But I'll give an example. A couple of my friends I've done real estate transactions with, you know, we had to communicate, maybe it was a couple of month transaction. But aside from that, if you've known them for 5 years, it's a fraction of your friendship. And it's not like when I was doing a transaction with one of them and we had a 2 hour dinner, maybe we talk for 2 minutes about like, hey, don't forget to do this and blah, blah, blah. And then it's done and then we have fun. So I think it's easy to overblow the negative, but I think the positive is you live an integrated life. And everyone that you're working with in business is just, it's people you want to be around, their energy. And I think that should always be the goal, right? I think the older I get, I always tell my wife, I'm like, if I can just keep, the 80-20 rule, if I can just keep the 20% of people that I just don't gel with and they're kind of difficult and they end up not even making me that much money anyway because they're difficult. If I can just kind of keep giving them away to other people, or just, we kind of lose contact, and I'm focusing on the 80 becoming 85, 90, 95. And eventually in a mythical future of perfection, there'll never be a name that pops up on my phone that I have to speak to that I don't want to.
Yeah. And also, Lawrence, there are different kinds of deep friendships. I'm realizing that, now there are clients with whom I have not done a whole lot of hanging out, and maybe I don't even see them that often because everybody gets busy. We live in different cities and all of that. And, as companies grow, I'm less working directly with them on stuff. I'm still doing stuff for their company, but it's still a very, very deep connection, and it's a deep trust. It's like, it's a level of trust that takes time and proximity of, at least, he's trusting me with his brand. So that's already a very, big deal. I find that with, I have other clients I talk to quite frequently, but again, don't generally go hang out. I mean, a lot of people just work a lot. That's the truth. And when they're not working, they want to be just with their family, or they want to be, I get, but again, it's love. It's not business.
Yes.
It's love between people. It's deep and profound connection. And I want to go back to, because you haven't really talked about it. We have, but you haven't talked about it here. You experienced material success at a very young age, right? You were about 21. You became a millionaire. Share a little bit about, and don't get excited, people, because he lost it. No, I'm just kidding.
I did lose a lot of it. I spent a lot.
He spent a lot of it. Well, okay, but I want you to share a little bit of your early life and business experience.
Yeah. So at the time, it was, you never can see it at the time, but now I look back at my life, I had 3 very distinct periods. And the first one was, I realized kind of early on that money was freedom. So I had this dream. I was all through my teen and my college experience, I was doing martial arts, and I loved the idea of fighting one day, but I knew being a professional fighter involves, it's pretty much a full-time job. So I was like, I started at a trading company, and I'd see these young guys making all this money. But when you're trading for a company and you make a lot of money, they give you maybe 10, 15%, and then they take the rest. So at 24, I left. I was getting, for a young guy, they were paying me well compared to my peers, but I knew I was making them, 10x, 15x that I was getting paid. So I set up my own trading company with an older friend who was also at the same company, and we did really, really well. And I was fighting as an amateur, like I won the Chicago Golden Gloves in boxing, and I was doing jiu-jitsu. And then I got to the stage where I was in my late 20s, and I didn't realize how much money I made because it was just going up in my trading account. And I thought, my other friends would tell me, like, Lawrence, you have such a good life going on. You're young, you're chasing girls, you're traveling, you have money. Why would you ever give this up? And I had this fear that it's like, yes, it's great now, but I have this dream about being a fighter and just testing myself because it scared the life out of me. And I thought, wow, I've got a lifetime to make money, but athletically, I think I quit when I was just turning 30. I have a very small window. Now, actually, you're seeing guys in the top level shows fighting, up until 40, sometimes early 40s. Back then, that was very, very unusual. So I figured in my head, I've got about a 5-year window. I've got to do it. So I basically gave away my trading company, which was very foolish. I should have kept the stake in it because it was very profitable, but I just gave it to one of my partners, and I left, and I fought for 5 years. And the best thing that I got from that was when, I think Will Smith said it in his biography, and it was great. He said when he was young and broke, he had the dream that if he had made money, he'd be happy. But then when he became famous and wealthy and he was still miserable, he was like, Jesus, I have nothing. I have nothing, no dream. He said it a bit more eloquently, but that's the thing, that having a lot of wealth when I was young was so great, because it wasn't like I got to my 50s and then I'm like been chasing wealth for 25 years. And then I realized, shit, I'm chasing the wrong thing. I've wasted half my life. I achieved it very early on. I realized, like, hey, wealth is great. It gives you freedom and it takes away your monetary stress, but it doesn't in itself make you happy. And so that was such a great lesson. I'm so glad that I got that at an early age. And listen, of course, Hersh, when I look back at my life, I made every wrong financial decision throughout the 2009 crisis. I had a bunch of over-leveraged stock portfolio that lost 85%. I still kept living a great lifestyle, even when my net worth was collapsing. I was still spending crazy amounts of money enjoying life. So of course, I wish I'd been a bit more smart and savvy, which I am now. I work in real estate and I help people buy, stabilized properties that are very safe long-term investments. So I learned the lesson the hard way. But I was so bummed out in my mid-30s when I had to kind of restart, and I realized I'd lost, all this money that I made when I was young. At the time, it was awful. When I changed careers in real estate, it wasn't fun. The first year, I always tell people, the first year I made what I could make in an afternoon trading on the trading floor in a whole year of work. It was very depressing. Yeah. But looking back now, Hersh, it was such a great thing, because reinvention made me grow in so many different ways that I always joke, if I just put a couple of $100 in Bitcoin when it was at 5 cents and I became a Bitcoin multimillionaire, I promise you I wouldn't be with my wife and I wouldn't be so happy now. I'd probably be, traveling, chasing young models and trying to be a playboy. And I guarantee you I'd be much less fulfilled and happy than I am now in the situation I have. So many times it's such a good lesson. I always love talking about it, because so many times with people, when you're going through the darkest moments, the worst breakups, the worst career things, whatever it is, when you're in the moment, life seems so bleak, and sometimes it's really hard to even imagine a better future. But the crazy thing about humanity is that you can look back at that exact same thing 10 years later and realize it was the best thing that happened to you. But it's so hard to see it in the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say, hindsight is 2020. But I do think, as a life lesson for young people, starting out and full of ambition and weighing time differently, like, in other words, saying, well, similar to how you approached, well, I have my physical fitness to fight as a fighter, I'm only going to have for so much time. Sometimes people think they have more time to find love, more time to fulfill themselves. And they think about life in terms of like two buckets. You got a bucket of material wealth, and you got a bucket of feels, and what I don't think they realize is that the feelings, the emotion, and the love and that stuff, that's the bucket. The money, yes, you can put money into it to make it better. You can put material, yes, into it to make it more exciting. But if you don't, yes, have the bucket, it's not that your bucket, because the family and all those things, those are really the inside. That's the inside. It's a nice, yes, and that's the thing. So however you look at it, it feels like if you don't have something to fill up with, the material goods don't do anything. It's an empty bucket, yeah, basically.
Well, again, I love quoting Neville Ravikant, because he's just got so many smart things he says. He said the three most important things in life, he said, a calm mind, a healthy body, and a loving family cannot be bought. And it's great because, the guy's, I don't know if he's a multimillionaire or I think he's probably a billionaire by now. But when you have a billionaire saying that, he knows, because he was probably thinking he was going to get that through happiness. And so many people, they give up their health. They let their health go. They let their friendships go. They're very mentally the opposite of calm. They're very distracted or frustrated. Yeah. And they're doing it all in the pursuit of money, thinking once I just get money, I'll be happy. And for the longest time, honestly, I had that realization that for the longest time, I was always a very goal-driven guy. And I used to think, okay, if I can just get through the next 4 weeks and get this fight out the way, I can relax and I'll be happy. Even if I lose, like, it's just the anxiety of the last 4 weeks. It's just like, if I can just pay this debt off and make money for this deal, I'll be happy. And I'd always have that. If I can just do this, then I'll be happy. And I realized it was only last year. I was at a friend's bachelor party in Mexico, and I was lying there in the sun, and I thought, if I wrote down everything, because there's so many things I want to do in my life. If I wrote down all the things I want to do and I wait until I do them, I've like missed out on life. Like I've got to just stop trying to link my happiness with things that I want out of life. And I've got to just have the confidence that I'm going to do my best, and I'm sure I'm going to have a bunch of other failures, but I'm going to be happy now in the process. And it's like, it's a real cliche with jiu-jitsu. They say it's not about the like the black belt. It's about the journey. It's about the person you become on the journey. It's such a cliche, but it's so true. It really is. Life is about the journey and about all the experiences along the way.
Yeah, very much so. And, and that's, I think, how, we should be approaching our goals with the things that really, matter in mind. When you talk about intrinsic goals, what do you mean by that?
I'm so glad you said that. So if I look back, I've actually got a notebook for the last probably 10 years in there. I write down all my goals. And before I would always have categories like, okay, this is my athletic goal. I want to run a marathon this year. I want to do this jiu-jitsu competition. I want to do these athletic things. Then I would have like business, I want to have this much sales. I want to make this much commission. And then it'll be fun stuff. Like I want to go to a country I've never been to before, and I want to do cool things with friends. And the last few years is the first time I would write things like, I want to be undistracted when I'm with my son, and I want to be really present, and I want to be better about conflict resolution with my wife, and just these things that it's not going to be a great flex and brag to my friends, like, oh, I just closed this deal, or I can put this Instagram post, like I just did this, but it's gonna give me the thing that Neville Ravikant was talking about with that calm mind, and that was so important. And my wife's a therapist, and it's funny because we've been together, I think, about 8 years now. And she very subtly has been giving me a lot of wisdom by psychoanalyzing me, but she's very sweet, and she did it in a very gentle, soft way because I'm a former fighter. So I've got that. If you approach me hard, I'm going to go right back, right? But I realized that over the years, I've learned so much wisdom from her, and she's really helped me with a lot of these things, like the non-physical goals, like the emotional goals, like even the fact that when we first started dating, we would fight. Because she's very sweet, but she's got a feisty side. So we'd have these arguments, and they would get a bit heated. And she would say to me, Lawrence, I think you're fighting your ex-girlfriend right now. And I'd be like, Jesus, Hersh, she was right. I was like, this is crazy. I am, And so much of that is I always thought that I had a pretty decent childhood, and I always thought like you'd make an excuse if you kind of go back and you're like, oh, my mom never loved me, or this, I was always like, that's weakness. Like as a former fighter, I never really thought about my youth like that. I'm like, I'm alive. That's good enough. But everybody, even people that had nice childhoods, there's still a lot of, I don't want to say trauma, but there's a lot of issues. The personalities that we have a lot of the time stem from these crucial moments in our youth, like when we're really young. And so she's also helped me see a lot of that. And I'm just trying to be better because naturally I do have a temper. That's one thing I've been working on a long time, but also just the idea of like what we were talking about before. If you're a type A personality, you're always going to think more is better. And like in business, when is enough? And I love it was Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22. And he was at a party with, I'm forgetting, it was a New York Times, it was a journalist. And the journalist said to him, how do you feel, Joe? They were at a party of some finance guy. Said, this guy probably made more today at the office than you've made from all your royalties of your bestseller, Catch-22. And he said, it feels okay because I have enough. And that's I think about that all the time. Like, what is enough? Like, when all's said and done, are you going to be thinking about the accolades you got from your boss? Or are you going to think about zeros in a bank account? Or are you going to be thinking about, I think the only thing you're going to think about is, I wish I had more time with the people I love. And that's so if we can try to have that idea, but not wait till we're 85, have it when we're 45, or, however old we are now, I think we can kind of live a better crafted life. And I think that's the ultimate thing is I love the idea of the belts in jiu-jitsu. You have blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. But it's like, I want to be a black belt in life. And I'm never going to get there, but I'm always it's going to be constant just tweaking things and recalibration and trying to work on things about myself and trying to get rid of toxic people and spend more time with pleasant people and try and be more present with my mind when I'm with my son and not thinking about work, because nothing's more frustrating when I'm trying to hang out with him and I'm like, oh, I didn't email this guy back, and oh, I didn't call this investor back. And that's becoming harder and harder today because we're such an attention economy. And honestly, Hersh, I really appreciate this conversation because it's a time that I can put my phone on silent in the other room and we can just be present. And how many times, you know what it's like, you go to dinner and you see four guys all on their phone on the table. You're like, Jesus, but we all do it.
Yeah, and we also say we're going to put the phone down or put the phone away or whatever it is, but we're constantly reorganizing our priorities, it seems,
Yes.
and that is what it is. And I mean, rather than try to say, okay, I'm going to master my control, like one of the things I tried to do is that thing where you check email only twice a day. It doesn't
Yes.
work for me. I'm too curious, honestly, about what's going on
Yes.
with the people that I've reached out to or heard from. And I'm just too curious. It's not going to work. I'm not going to check my email at noon and at 9 a.m. and that, it's not going to work. But I can remind myself to be more present in a moment,
That's
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but that's
no,
that's actually a really powerful thing you just said, because you said it's not going to work for you. And I think part of
yeah,
getting older and getting wiser in life is knowing yourself. So there's these people that have this, 2.5 hour morning ritual in the morning before they even look at their phone or all these different things. I know myself, I'm a night owl. In the mornings are not my best time. So I normally roll out of bed, have a glass of water, maybe pee, and then I'm straight looking at my phone saying, is there any fires that I have to put out right now? Okay, maybe I'll spend 2 minutes putting them out, and then I'll do whatever I have to do.
yeah,
And I remember talking to a it was some kind of he was a fancy business coach. And I said, I mentioned that to him. And he said, well, that's great, Lawrence. You know yourself, and you called it curiosity. I call it just like, yeah, I wouldn't have peace of mind doing a morning routine, knowing there could be fires at work that I haven't dealt with, if that makes sense. So I
yeah,
really like the fact you said that, just knowing yourself and your personality, and then trying to live a life that matches well. So I'll give you another example. I'm a night owl, but for a decade I was getting up at 5 a.m. to be on the trading floor at 6, and I hated it every single morning. And I remember when I quit and I started fighting, the very first thing I did is I slept till 10 a.m. And I remember waking up being like, oh, this is life. So it's like it's now I would never do a business opportunity that was going to have me get up at dawn every day, because I know that doesn't really work for my natural cycle. So it's just finding these, knowing yourself. I just think it's such a powerful concept for happiness.
yeah, yeah. That knowing yourself, and knowing yourself only comes with giving yourself a little patience, giving yourself a break, going easy on yourself. As someone who trains and trains others, you know that there's a propensity for pressure, and there's a difference between discipline, and pressure.
Mm.
Let me ask you this. So we talked a little bit about fatherhood, right? Your son's 3.5 years old now. So not just what are the changes, the transitions in fatherhood? And as I have kids, so it's like I've gone through and continue to go through all the various stages and everything, but looking ahead now at the next couple of years, what do you see? What are some things that fatherhood influences in your life and that you're thinking about as important in the next couple of years?
Well, as soon as I finish, I want to ask you the exact same question, because I think
Okay.
you're a bit further along down the road than me, and I always like to learn from dads like you. But I think the biggest thing that I love to share with people is I was 41 and a half when I had my son. And I was always a very curious person. I've had to, on average, I've probably read a book a week the last 25 years. I was always a big reader, so I'm very curious about different subjects. And having said that, I had no clue of how I feel today. And it's such a good reminder that I saw parenthood as something that I knew she'd be a great mom. She was a primary school teacher when she was young. And I liked the idea of starting a family with her. But I still had the impression I'd have all these negative things people would say to me when I was younger doing cool things. They'll say, oh, enjoy doing that now, because when you have family, it's all going to stop. So I had this negative imprinting very subtly for many, many years. And I had this idea that when I became a parent, all the fun would stop and it would just be this drudgery of keeping this little thing alive. I had no idea of the happiness he would give me. And I remember when my wife gave birth, it was actually crazy. It was right in the middle of COVID. And we went in and they basically tested her. They said, you have COVID. And they kicked me out. And they said she has to be isolated. She was crying. She's scared, her first kid. And I felt like a terrible husband. I couldn't see her for 2.5 days. I think I had to wait to get a negative test and everything. And so she was isolated for a while. And then they didn't even know what they were doing. It was Northwestern Hospital, one of the best hospitals in the world, but they changed their policy every 2 hours. So as soon as she gave birth, they were like, okay, you're fine, you're in with us. But I remember during that time, I did so much soul searching. You can imagine, I was a dad, but I didn't see my son for 2.5 days. So I went for a long run. I'll never forget. I was just like, is this it? Is all the fun stuff that I love doing is going to be over? And I remember running and thinking, why? Like, why do I have to live a life that I've never done that before? Why do I have to assume that just because people would say these negative comments to me that I can't still do fun things? And so that was a big thing where I don't believe in, there's certain things that society, these expectations, one of the top regrets of the dying is I wished I hadn't done what society or my family expected of me. And I love that. I love the idea of living an unorthodox life. So that was a big realization. And then the second thing was I had no idea of the happiness he would give me. And I'll say this for all new dads. It took me a while it took at least a year for me to, I remember he was a year and 4 months and we went on a family trip to Hawaii. And that week I bonded with him so much. I felt like this is what feeling like a father is feeling like. Before that, I felt like a sham. Because of course you have a love for him, but I was like, I didn't really feel like I had a connection. And now these little things, I went out to dinner with 4 friends who are, one's married, the other guy's a single, no kids. And I remember I was late in the city. My son stayed up till 11:30. I got home and I live an hour south of Chicago now. So I drive all the way home. He was in bed, but he wouldn't sleep. And he kept saying to my wife, no, want to wait for daddy, want to wait for daddy. And he runs up to me and he's never been that affectionate where he just grabbed me and I pick him up. And I remember that feeling. And the first thing I wanted to do is text my buddies like, hey, this was so incredible. And then I remember that they just wouldn't get it. And that's not being mean because I wouldn't get it either. And so the lesson there for anyone listening, this doesn't apply to parenthood, this applies to life, is especially in this political age we live where everyone's so divided and they have these strong viewpoints on, whether it's Israel, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's Trump, Biden, they're really strong with all these viewpoints, is don't be so quite sure you have it all. Be a little flexible because I've changed. I have so much of a different viewpoint. And the biggest gift has been like, you don't know what you don't know. And I don't know what I'm going to think in 3 years that I think today would be crazy. And that's because I'm going to learn and hopefully evolve. And I think that's such a beautiful message. So fatherhood's really given me more respect for the uncertainty of life and how humans change our opinions. And we shouldn't be stuck to our views, right? We should evolve and we should change our views. And one thing I love about Joe Rogan, he talks about that all the time. Hersh is not his view on something on this day. That's not you. You're you and you're flexible and you're curious. That's why you have podcasts. And that's why I really resonate with you. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation because not all people are like that. Not all people are so flexible.
Yeah, that's really, there's a lot of wonderful stuff in your response there.
What can I ask you?
Yes. Yeah. So it's pretty simple. I think that where I'm at now, looking ahead, is that, I have 5 kids. I have 1 granddaughter so far. My objective is to structure my business pursuits and all the stuff that I do in order to facilitate our going places with our family and taking the family places. Like that's really it. That to me is, the pinnacle because it involves all this other stuff. It means seeing, they're a little spread out right now. So that means seeing them all, gathering them all, whatever, what we've always done, which is to provide them with experiences, rather than just things. So I think that's that next level, is to say, okay, this is now where my head is at, is everything I do is really with that goal in mind. Okay. A little bit of mobility, a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of, and I think that's kind of that's the agenda, but it's not, there are more specific goals than that, but that's the one that that my wife and I both, kind of share. And, her career also allows her some flexibility, but we're, it's like you attract what you manifest in some ways, that kind of vibe. You manifest, you attract the people who you feel are going to be a good fit for you in that sense. All of that stuff that we talked about, that bucket that you're going to put all your wonderful emotions and all of that wonderful stuff in. I probably keep inverting the metaphor. That's right. Either way, having both those things is a really important thing for me. It completes the picture to have
Mm.
flexibility.
Can I ask you, Hirsch, how is being a granddad different from being a father? Because my dad said to me, being a granddad's the best because you get the fun, but you don't have as much responsibility. So you can just really enjoy the grandkids and then give them back. So,
Well, yeah. I mean, there is that for sure. That there's a lot of enjoying the wonder of babies without having to be constantly drained
mm,
by the by the experience of parenthood, and my daughter and son-in-law and baby live in Israel, so they're further away from us than we would like, and going there, and then of course with everything that's going on, it becomes even a little more, a little more powerful and emotional,
yeah,
but it's that attitude that I have about the travel and the mobility really started about a year and a half ago when my granddaughter was born, because I was factoring in, having one child who's going to go away to college and another one that's having a baby, and then the other one, all this stuff
mm,
going on, and just thinking, well, they're kind of spread out. It's not going to
right.
just be a house that everybody comes to, and you spend all your energy trying to get them to come home to you, which it becomes harder and harder for people depending
Yes.
on where they are. So the idea of sitting on your throne and like waiting for all the kids to gather around and like be around, it doesn't suit us, and I don't think it's practical. But so the grandparenthood thing is remarkable in that it's part of you, but you're at the same time a little bit, you have the time to give yourself a little, take a deep
Yes.
breath,
Yes.
so
Well, but what you said about mobility is so interesting, Hersh. So that's one thing I realized early on is if I was making, whatever it was as an entrepreneur, say, and I could make double that, but being tied to someone's schedule and you have to be at the office at this time and everything, I would never take that because there's so many different types of wealth. There's the purely the zeros in your bank account wealth, but there's also, the wealth of flexibility, of freedom, of not answering to people, of ownership, and I think there's so many times people overlook that when they're trying to make decisions with their career. But I've said, I remember saying for years, like, I'll always take less money and more flexibility for that exact reason. And I think it's such a good thing to remind people is we live in a world of very binary thinking. A lot of people are thinking like it's, left or right or A and B or this country versus that country. And Thomas Sowell said it best. He said, everything in life is a trade-off and there's no absolutes. It's all trade-offs. And I just think it's so true. Every time I say yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. If I say yes to a social event with friends, I'm saying no to an evening with my wife and son. And I really have that idea of realizing what the consequences are of certain things. And so I think when it comes to people's careers and their job choices, they're very shallow in their thinking. They're just thinking, oh, this is going to make more money, so I'm going to go for that because they're thinking that's going to lead to more happiness. And I would argue it's the opposite. It's the one that's more aligned with you, where you enjoy the work, you enjoy the people you're working with. The schedule it fits for you. It's more flexible. So I just think that's I love talking about that stuff because it's just we just live in a world where people don't talk in subtleties, and you have people pretend to be experts on everything. And I always look at myself and I'm like, man, I've spent a lifetime. One of my big priorities ever since I was in my early 20s was just to try and learn and be educated. And if there's one thing that I know, it's the old Socrates quote. He said, if there's one thing I know, it's that I don't know anything. I feel like I'm more uncertain now and I know more about things that I don't know today than I did when I was 25. And hopefully I've learned a lot, but it's almost like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. I don't know if you've got this with traveling, but the more I travel, the more I realize that, wow, the earth it's a big place. There's so many places to go to. I think I'm pretty well traveled, but I'm well aware there's so many different countries out there that I've never been to. I'd love to go to. So I just think it's a good mindset to have a bit of humility.
yeah, I love putting those two together, travel and humility, because that is ultimately what that does for you, is kind of see the vastness of the world, obviously perceive the minute quality that we possess, in terms of what we are. To circle back around and give you the last word, first of all, let the audience know where to find you, but also, we didn't really talk about your book either.
Thank you.
I want to mention your book, The Forgotten Asset Class, and also your podcast, Enter the Lionheart. We'll have all this stuff in the show notes, but I also hope we'll talk again. So in any event, take us out, if you would, with how to find you, and also just kind of a wish for anyone who's listening.
Well, thank you. I love that. And we'll definitely talk again. I'd love to have you on my podcast, Enter the Lionheart. And I think it comes from, that was my fighting nickname, Lionheart, from my fighting days. And it's just, I love having conversations like these about different things and just picking people's brains, whether it's someone who's got, like, you're incredible to me, Hersh. You have 5 kids. And there's so much I want to pick your brains about selfishly because I want to be a better dad. And then, I love talking to entrepreneurs. I love talking to former fighters, current fighters. There's so many different interesting people out there. So I love having these kind of conversations. And the book really came about that I don't believe that money is the thing we should strive for, but I also believe having some, I look at all the mistakes I made when I was wealthy, and I wish I had a bit more of the knowledge that I have today when I had all those zeros in my bank account, because I would have been much smarter. And the book really is, I called it The Forgotten Asset Class. It's about real estate investing. And the reason it's forgotten is I have an MBA in finance, and they don't talk about real estate. All they talk about is stocks, bonds, cash, and you kind of have these ratios. As you get older, you try and have less exposure to the stock market because of the volatility. But there's one secret of the uber rich and multimillionaires, and they all hold vast real estate holdings. And we talk about some of the reasons for that, things like leverage and tax benefits. If you're a high earner and you have a building that makes you no money, it breaks even every year, you're going to save so much on your write-offs with your depreciation every time you do your taxes. That's a huge positive asset for you. So it's just trying to learn the system. And I love the idea of life being a game. I feel like it takes a bit of the edge off the seriousness of life. And then, well, what do you do with the game? You learn the rules, you try and win it. So I think that's such a beautiful thing. And you mentioned something, I want to put this full circle, Hersh. You mentioned something about doing things with love at the beginning of this conversation. And that's one that Martin Seligman wrote this book, Authentic Happiness, 20 years ago, and it kind of launched the positive psychology movement, because before it was about taking a messed up person to normal. That was psychology. And he said, well, what about trying to take a normal person to a flourishing person? And so he had him and a few other guys set up this new branch of positive psychology. And my brother got that for me. I think I was 24 when I read it. And you take this test and it figures out what are your strengths, and then how can you best apply those to your career and your life to find happiness. And when I took that test, the strength, back then I was like a young, hungry guy trying to make money, and I was amateur fighter. And it was all things like dedication and perseverance and hard work, and curiosity was one of them. And I was like, I really want to take that test. It's been 20 years. I wonder if it's the same. And I took the test. Hersh, number one, I was blown away. My number one signature strength was love. And I was like, Jesus, I've become from a fighter to a hippie. I just love everyone. But I was so happy that it happened, because that means that I'm not the same person, thankfully, and I've evolved. But I think if I'm going to leave one word, or one thing for people to think about that are listening to this, is try to do things with a bit more love. And I have a good mentor who says every time we come to a decision, you tend to make your decision based on love or fear. So I'm just trying to make more and more decisions through love and not through fear. And that doesn't mean I don't feel fear. I feel fear every single time I go to the gym and I go on the jiu-jitsu mats. I've got big gorillas trying to choke me unconscious. I face fears every day. But I try and do things from a position of love. And I think that's such good advice. Just try and be a nicer person. There's so many people that they virtue signal online, but what about just being a good person? Don't talk about it. Just be it. Just do a bit more love with all your interactions. I heard this beautiful thing. When you get coffee, just look at the barista's eye and say, thank you so much. Have a great day. Just give a little bit of niceness in all your daily transactions with people, or interactions, not transactions. All your interactions, just try and be a bit more loving. And I think that's something that I'm personally working on, is just not trying to bend the world to me so I can accomplish my goal, but trying to just enjoy the human experience and just put a bit more love out there and try and, brighten everyone's day that I interact with on a daily basis.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.